So we're now ready to tackle our final project of the day, and that's building up a calculator program. If you head over to calculator-final.appry.repl.run, you'll see how the final project works. We get to enter a number, and then pick an operation, and then pick the next number, and it will calculate the results. Now, at this point, we can either continue to calculate with the result from the previous step, so let's multiply it by 2. Alternatively, I can type n, and that clears the screen and lets me start out a new calculation. Like so. Now, because a lot of the concepts that are covered in this project are actually quite difficult, I want to go through this project together. And while we're building it up, there's also a lot of small challenges along the way that I want you to tackle. Once you're ready, head over to the calculator starting file and fork your own copy to get started. This calculator is going to have some different functions that it can do. So for example, we'll start out with a add function, which takes 2 inputs, n1 and n2, and then it simply just returns n1 plus n2. This is pretty simple. This is all that there is to the functionality of adding. Takes one number and adds it to the other one. And I want you to go ahead to create the functions in this same format for these other mathematical operations. So subtract, multiply, and divide. Pause the video and complete this challenge. Alright, so subtract is as simple as add, so we'll just call it subtract. We pass in again 2 numbers, n1 and n2, and we'll return the outcome as n1 minus n2. And for time's sake, I'm just going to copy and paste these for the last 2, and I'm going to rename them multiply and divide, and then when numbers are multiplied, we use the asterisk sign, and when number are divided, we use the /. So now we have 4 functions: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And what we want to do is we want to somehow store these functions inside a dictionary. Here's another challenge for you. Can you create a dictionary where the keys are each of these symbols that we've used to add or subtract or multiply, and the values are just the names of the functions? So pause the video and try that now. All right, let's go ahead and create this dictionary. Now we start out, of course, with a set of curly braces, and as I mentioned, each of the keys are going to be the symbols for the operations, and the values are going to be the names of the functions. So we've got plus, and then we've got subtract, multiply, and divide. So now we have this dictionary. Let's go ahead and save it inside a variable called operations. Now this dictionary is going to act as the means in which we're going to call these functions. At some point down here, we want to be able to tap into the operations and then pass in the key that we want. So for example, multiply, and then store this as the function that we want. That means we can then call this function and then pass in one number and a second number, and this function is currently going to act as the multiply function. Now if we change this to plus, then this function is now going to act as the add function. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called num1, where we ask the user for an input to say, what's the first number? And this number, of course, has to be converted into an integer. Now, the next thing to do is to ask them for the second number. So this is going to be pretty much the same as this line of code, other than the word second. Now, the next thing is we want to ask them which of these operations they want to do. Firstly, we want to be able to loop through this dictionary and print out each of these keys. And then we're going to ask the user to type out one of them so that we can figure out which operation they actually want to do. Go ahead and try to use a for loop to loop through this dictionary of operations and print out each of these symbols. All right, now we're going to use a for loop, and we know that when we use a for loop with a dictionary, it will loop through all the keys rather than the values or the actual entries. We can say for each symbol in the dictionary operations, go ahead and print out the symbol. And at the moment, if I run this code, you'll see that it'll ask us for the first number, the second number, and then it's going to loop through that list and then print out all the operations. So now we're ready to go ahead and ask them for an operation symbol. Pick an operation from the line above. So they're going to see all of these keys, and then they get to pick an operation like so. And that symbol is now going to be saved within this variable. So now we can go ahead and take that operation symbol to pick out the value that's associated with it. For example, if in this case the user chose the plus symbol, then we're going to pick out the add function. And then, just as I've shown you before, we want to use that add function to add these two numbers together. But of course, if they picked a different symbol, then we want to be able to carry out the different operation. See if you can get this calculator to work so we can print out the num1 and then the operation symbol and then num2 and finally the equal sign and then the answer. See if you can make this line of code work and make sure that it works whenever you choose any of these operations, and it'll calculate it using these numbers that you input. Pause the video now. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to get hold of the calculation function. And this is going to be done using the operation symbol. So we're going to tap into our dictionary of operations here, and then we're going to use the square brackets to pass in the operation symbol. Now we can use this calculation function as if it were any of these functions. And that's of course based on the choice the user made here. So we can now say calculation function, and we can pass in the num1 as the first input, num2 as the second input. And of course, our function all have a return value. And so this part is going to be replaced when the code runs with the actual answer. So we can now save that inside a variable called answer, and then that will get sent over here, and we can now test it out. So let's try adding 3 plus 5. So I'm going to use the add symbol, and we end up with 3 plus 5 equals 8. Now, what about something a little bit more complicated? 45, 78, and we'll choose multiply. Now, I think in reality, it actually makes more sense to put num2 after the users entered the operation symbol, so that you actually end up with a better user experience like this. You can pick the first number, pick the operation, and then pick the second number.